Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Velody, and as always, there is a COVID update. And when we need a COVID update, we go to our friend, Dr. Andy Nowalk. Andy, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kishore. I at this point, I hope your listeners aren't too tired of me butting my way into the podcast. So
I don't know that anyone could be tired of you, Andy, but I do think that for all of us, we are just tired of COVID and Greek letters.
Amen. Amen. Never have we appreciated less the Greek alphabet, let me tell you.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. So indeed, another Greek letter came to made our Thanksgiving holiday ending not so joyous as this news came out of the Omicron variant. And so I was wondering if you could just give us, just as always, a COVID update in general, of course, addressing this Delta, Omicron, and your thoughts on COVID in general at this time.
Yeah, so I think I would say, to kind of frame this, just to remind all of our listeners that we are now approaching our second real year of the pandemic in the United States. If you remember way back when, it's just about this time in December of 2019 that I remember reading on an email listserv that I'm on called the ProMed Digest, which is an emerging infection digest. I remember reading in ProMed a report about a novel coronavirus in China, and thinking, not realizing that was, sort of the black cat crossing my path, the dark omen in the sky. I don't know. So we've been at this for about 2 years. And what we've learned over time is this is an exceptionally difficult virus to get a handle on in terms of control of spread and effective treatment. We're still struggling with that a little bit. Then I'm going to fast forward you to last summer, because in June, I think you and I did a podcast in June, and I was not at Cheshire Cat level of smiling, but I was pretty content. If you looked around the United States, we dropped to less than 10,000 cases a day. Here in the Pittsburgh area, we had a couple of days where we had single-digit cases. And I said, I think that we're in pretty good shape with vaccination and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then we got a lesson in how variants of this virus, that is, forms of the virus that have mutated genetically and acquired some different properties, can impact us. And so the summer was characterized by the wave of the Delta variant, which came across the globe. And the Delta variant, as we're all familiar with, we've been dealing with the Delta variant for the last, 8 months in the United States. And the Delta variant, if you looked at the United States before Delta, there were a bunch of different variants of the virus circulating. There was the OG virus, there was the Alpha virus, which came from the UK, the Beta virus, which came from Brazil. There were a real mixture of different variants in the United States. And what was remarkable to me back then was Delta wiped the table. Within about, a 4-week period. It went from no strains in the United States to 99% of the strains identified in the United States. So what that proved is that a really infectious form of the virus could completely take over all transmission. And so we've been suffering from that. And so that was the bad news, right? We had a late summer with a lot of cases, and we have really been fighting in various places in the United States, big outbreaks that have been particularly severe in children. Because if you all remember the last few podcasts, we went back to school this year, which was a good thing and a bad thing. It was a good thing because our kids needed it. They needed the socialization. It was a bad thing because they weren't able to be vaccinated, many of them. And there were very variable policies school to school about who was going to mask and how they were going to protect kids. So lots of kids have gotten infected. Very sadly, as you and I know, just in the past 4 months or so, 500 children have died in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it's been a very big challenge. So we have been all Delta. And then a few weeks ago, I was reading that same ProMed and reading my CDC email, and someone mentioned a new Greek letter. And actually it was new first. And then because because new and U from the Greek alphabet sounds too much like new NEW in English. Literally, they moved on to O.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. An interesting choice by WHO to try to not confuse people, as if the Greek letters were not confusing. And so, like every time in the pandemic, many people said to me, "Oh, what's Omicron going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. You know, we have one report. We've had many variants. I have to point out to you, many variants that came up, and we were like, and then you don't know anything about them. For example, nobody talks about gamma, and nobody talks about epsilon, and we have those variants, but they just didn't have enough difference from Delta to overcome it. And the initial reports were from South Africa, and it sounded very infectious. And I said, well, let's wait and see. And if you look at the United States in the last 4 weeks, we had at first 0% Omicron, and then 0.3% Omicron, and then 3% Omicron. And then last week, pretty remarkably, the reporting came out early this week that we had gone from 3 to 70% Omicron in the space of a week. So what does that tell us about Omicron? We are still, it's come so fast that we're still trying to figure out 15 different things about it. But you would be foolish not to just intuitively say, this has got to be way more contagious than the Delta strain. And, you know, that's our first base assumption. We're waiting for the specific data, but we know that Omicron seems to be more infectious than the Delta strain. What else do we know about it? Everything else is speculation, because it's moved so fast, it's moved ahead even of our research. We do have some suggestion that it is less severe in terms of the disease it causes compared to Delta and the prior strains, so our variants rather. So that I'm still a little bit uncomfortable saying with any certainty, but the early data out of South Africa, where it was really seen and studied first, has seemed to suggest fewer people are getting very sick with it. Another thing that's important that we do know about it is, much like Delta, you know, you and I have suffered since the beginning of this because of as we've talked about a million times, this has a really long incubation period, this virus. So, you know, you could be, for example, in Chicago, rooting with your families and your brother Doss for the Bears, fruitlessly, as always, on a Monday. And with the old strains of the virus, if you were exposed by them, you might not get sick until 10 days later, 2 weeks later. It had a long incubation period, which is a huge part of the problem, because what it meant is people could travel a long way before they started spreading more virus. So Delta, you know, and so let's put a number on that. Average time of incubation for the original strains, 7 to 8 days. One of the things about Delta that's been very interesting to us is it accelerated that. So the average time to getting sick with Delta was 4 to 5 days. And what we're hearing initially, and it needs to be confirmed, but it seems pretty reliable, is with Omicron, you get sick in 2 to 3 days. Now we're talking about something that's more like an influenza type virus. And that's both good and bad. If you get sick very quickly, sometimes the rapid tests aren't as useful. And so we're going to have to figure out what rapid tests mean for us moving forward. There is a silver lining there, though. If people get sick quickly, they can't travel as far, and they can't infect as many people. So that actually may be a little bit of an advantage to us in the long run, that it has a shorter incubation time. And then finally, and most importantly for everybody on the call, you have heard us chant about vaccines over and over and over again. And that's because they have saved literally millions of lives around the world, hundreds of thousands of lives in the United States, if not more. So these vaccines are safe and they're effective. And what we found is vaccinated people who are boosted have very good protection against Omicron. Not the same protection they have against the original strains, but very good protection in the area of 70 to 75% prevention of infection. That's the estimate so far. Whereas vaccinated but not boosted drops a good bit to 50%, which sounds terrible. But if I offered you, if a truck was hurtling towards you at 100 miles an hour, and I said, here is a rope that will give you a 50% chance of surviving the truck hitting you, you take the rope. That's a great idea. But what we know is that if you are unvaccinated and priorly infected with COVID, it provides you almost no protection, maybe 20%. So yet another reason to get vaccinated, even though these vaccines were not designed against the Omicron variant, they still work okay. So please get vaccinated, and even more, please get your loved one with Down syndrome vaccinated and boosted if at all possible. You could save their life.
So, Andy, I guess one of the questions that we get from families very often in the center is, and I'm glad you said it so clearly, is should we get the vaccine? Now it's, should we get our child boosted? Is there enough data for children or people with Down syndrome? And how would you answer that if you could tell us as clearly as possible? What would your answer be to either of those questions, vaccination and boosting in people with Down syndrome?
I would say that you and I are now sadly very familiar from a lot of data, some of which, you know, I helped publish with the International Research Group, that is very clear that Down syndrome is a risk for bad outcomes with this. Our loved ones with Down syndrome are at significant increased risk versus everyone else from this virus. And that's never been a surprise to us, right? We predicted from the beginning, all things respiratory virus and respiratory bacteria, all those infections, those are the thing we fear the most in our loved ones with Down syndrome. You know, my son Peter is 15, and the thing that's most likely to cause him the most trouble is a respiratory infection, you know, period. So, and we know that adults with Down syndrome, if your loved one is an adult, it's the #1 cause of mortality across all people with Down syndrome. So we knew this might be bad. And as the data has come out, that risk is significant. So to be very clear, what I mean is, if you have twin children, let's say they are twin boys and they're both 15, like my son Peter, one boy born without Down syndrome, one boy born with Down syndrome, your child with Down syndrome has a several-fold increased risk of dying from that virus if they are infected with it compared to their sibling who does not have the extra chromosome. So this is a dangerous condition for our people with Down syndrome. So what do? We do what all of us always do for our community. We do what we can to protect them. And we are all, I mean, the people who come to your clinic, Kishore, right? Every day they come in for those routine checks, they're protecting their child, they're protecting their loved one, their adult with Down syndrome. So you should vaccinate everyone who's available to be vaccinated against COVID right now if they weren't vaccinated. And let me be clear, from the ages of 5 up to the ages of 105, everybody can get a vaccine. Everybody. And the safety data now for 5 to 11-year-olds is amazing. The vaccine both works and it's unbelievably safe. Some of those heart problems that we saw with the adolescents, we're just not seeing in the 5 to 11-year-olds. It is so reassuring. So having said that, if I'm going to tell you you've got to vaccinate, and I just told you that people who are vaccinated and boosted actually have pretty good protection against Omicron, it follows, get them boosted if you can. You know, boosting is still not approved for some of the younger children. So it goes down to 16 now that boosters are officially approved. We are very hopeful to see data and approval for 12 to 15-year-old or 11 to 15-year-olds sometime in the next month. And then boosters, I think, will get approved very rapidly for the 5 to 11-year-old crowd because the safety data has been so good. So as soon as they're available to be boosted, get them boosted immediately. Again, you could save their life. I know the people listening to this podcast, when their child or their adult with Down syndrome gets in a car, they make sure their seatbelt's on, not just because it's the law, but because they love them and they want to protect them. That's what vaccines do. They love and protect our community, and they're safe. They're so safe. They are an easy way to save your child's life and your adult with Down syndrome's life. Who wouldn't want to do that?
That's wonderful. And Andy, I just want to say, and all of our listeners to hear as well, we've had so many people say that this podcast has been helpful in them making that decision to vaccinate their child with Down syndrome. So I love this. And I guess while you're with us, any prognostication you could give us for the under 5-year-old vaccine? I just saw some news that came out saying that 2 doses didn't seem to raise their antibody levels as expected. So what do we think for the under 5-year-old population at this time for the COVID vaccine?
So this is a work in progress. And I will say, I get a lot of concerns from parents about they're rushing this, they're not paying attention to safety. Well, I just want to point to this most recent data as a real example of the fact that what they are doing is trying to be as safe as they possibly can be. So when the 5 to 11-year-old vaccine was developed, they looked at different doses of the vaccine and picked the lowest dose that was effective. And so when they picked that dose, it worked really well at about a third of the dose given to the adolescents. So then when they were going to the trials for the 6-month-old and older, and those kids, they used the lower dose of vaccine because it worked in the 5 to 11-year-olds. Well, that lower dose of vaccine, curiously, didn't seem to work very well in the 2 to 5-year-olds for some reason. Whereas it did seem to work okay in the 6-month-old to 2-year-olds. So what are we doing? We're going to go back and study different doses. It's going to take a little longer than I would have liked for the 2 to 5-year-old vaccines to come out, but I'm confident at a higher dose, it will be immunogenic in the same way it is in the lower kids. And by immunogenic, I mean, it's going to generate a good immune response from your body that'll protect you against the virus. But it's going to take a little longer, and I'm frustrated. But I'm frustrated because we're being extra cautious about safety, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's frustrating in particular for me because I know that although the 0 to 4-year-old age group has historically been a little more resistant to infection than other age groups, we have actually seen the highest death rate from infection in that age group compared to all of the other pediatric age groups. And I think that's a contributor to the fact that we have a lot of kids with serious heart disease and serious lung disease in that population, and they have a disproportionately bad outcome. And again, I mention that because a lot of our kids in the community in that age group suffer from the things that kids with Down syndrome often suffer from. They suffer from heart disease, and they often will suffer from lung disease. So if you have kids in that age group, they can't be vaccinated yet they're at risk. You know what's a great way to protect them? Vaccinate everybody around them. And that is the best first way to do it. So if you were a parent of a child who's 18 months old and has congenital heart disease, and you're nervous because you can't vaccinate them yet, great time for you to get a booster. And everybody who visits to be careful about making sure they're vaccinated along the way, especially during these holiday times.
Yes. So Andy, this is the holiday season, as you just mentioned, and it's a season for hope. Whether we're talking about Christmas time or New Year's, and everyone wants to have hope this time of year. So let me ask you this tough question as you pull out your crystal ball. Is it possible that Omicron, because it is so infectious and because hopefully it continues to be a less severe variant, is it possible that this is the end of the pandemic phase of COVID, that in a few months we might do a podcast to say, everyone got Omicron infected or vaccinated or whatever, and now we see the pandemic phase come to a close? Is it possible?
It's possible. It's just not likely.
Okay.
What I would say, and it depends on how you define pandemic a little bit. The first thing is, let me put my disclosure on this podcast. In the last 2 years, I have been wrong many times. You have said, pull out your crystal ball, and I pull out a crystal ball that evidently has many cracks in it because I get a lot of stuff wrong along the way. So I am more than aware that I have been incorrect in my predictions, but I feel pretty confident in saying that a year from now, 2 years from now, Christmas 2023, we will still be testing and treating people for COVID infections because this virus has been very challenging. It's been a virus that's reset a lot of our assumptions about how pandemics happen. And I don't see it being eradicated ever, to be completely honest, from humanity. But I think that over the next couple of years, even if we have a pandemic level of disease, we still have a lot of infection, we're going to get better and better ability to lessen the severity of infection and protect people who choose to be protected. Would I still like everybody in the world to put on a mask for 2 weeks and therefore we'd eliminate almost all COVID? Yes. That's not going to happen, though. We've proved that. So what I'd like to see is some of the things we see. I love the virus to help us. And as infectious as this strain is, the fact that the incubation period is getting shorter and the severity seems to be lessening, I think, is hopeful.
Okay.
That means fewer people in the hospital, and thank goodness, fewer people passing away. Our tools in terms of vaccines, I can't tell you, when you think about how rapidly we've responded to this and run these trials and turned out literally billions of doses of vaccine, this will probably stand out as one of the greatest vaccination successes in the history of mankind. And we're not going to stop. Our companies are now well provided to churn out an incredible amount of these vaccines. They've built new factories, their production lines are great, and they have the ability now to respond to a new strain of virus, or a new variant rather, within months. You and I used to wait years for vaccines to be developed, and now it's months. This is transformational and revolutionary. So that will help. And you know what? We're finally getting a little better at treating you when you get infected. We have some things like the monoclonal antibodies, which is giving you artificial immunity, that are now approved for very young children and can, we think, very much moderate disease and save a bunch of lives there. We have a couple of pills, one from Merck and one from Pfizer, which seem effective. The Pfizer pill, very much so, which may mean that rather than having to get an infusion through an IV of something, we might be able to give some people a pill at home when they develop disease. We're being able to turn out rapid tests more frequently and that are better tests. So you might be able to diagnose yourself at home and start that pill. And then when you get really sick, we're better at it in the hospital. But I will tell you, this virus is going to be with us for a long time. And when it gets out of pandemic levels and we call it more endemic, which means it's just kind of part of the local milieu, I will be glad of that. But if it never happened, I still would have been glad, because it's been a lethal lesson in how bad pandemic diseases can be.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Well, Andy, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on this podcast. And I hope we don't have more Greek letters coming, at least in the near future, but I know who to call if we have questions. And so I really appreciate that. And our listeners appreciate that as well. For our listeners, a couple of things. Don't tune out just yet. A couple of things I want to make sure you know. One is 2022 is coming, and we would love to know what topics you would like us to cover on the podcast. So please do email us at downsyndromecenter@chp.edu. Let us know what topics you'd like to cover. And if you happen to be someone who has a special interest in something, or you want to share something on the podcast, send us a message. We'd like to look at that and let you know what we think about that. So please do reach out. And lastly, also, it's year end, and a lot of folks wonder, where can we support? What can we support? Our center at the Down Syndrome Center here in Pittsburgh, we would love to have your support in the year end. So please do seek that out at givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. We would love to connect with you that way and let you support us and our endeavors here at the center, including this podcast. That would be wonderful for you to join our team. But until next time, bye-bye.